The inner critic sabotages your creativity. It makes you second guess every decision. It drains your confidence and it reminds you of every stupid thing you said during a conversation. And believe me, I know what I'm talking about. For years, I let my inner critic control every aspect of my life. It kept me from sharing ideas, from putting myself out there, and taking risks. But I have put hundreds of hours into mastering my inner voice, my inner critic, and I finally found a method that worked. And in this video, I will share a ridiculously easy 5-step framework that will not only quiet your inner critic, but turn it into your best ally. Because if your inner critic stops running this show, you will gain clarity, confidence, and the freedom to fully express yourself. And in the end of the video, I will give you a few valuable tricks that you can't miss, so make sure you stick around. All right, step number 1. So the first thing you need to realize is that you are not your inner critic. It's not representing your full self. It is a part of you, and it definitely has something to say, obviously, but it is not as much in charge as it would like to be. And you probably have heard of that. I mean, yeah, sure, I am not my inner critic, but that's easier said than done. Even though we are aware that there's just a voice and it's not us, we will forget about that and we will get caught up in our things, and it will take over at some point and it will take charge. And we will not notice that it's actually just a part that we could control or that we could work with. So the first thing we need to do is to separate ourselves consciously from our inner critic. I will show you how it works. When I am following the steps of this framework, I like to just sit down in a comfortable place and close my eyes, take a few breaths, and just arrive here with myself in this present moment. And then I will go through these steps. You can decide how it works best for you. So while my eyes are closed, I will try to locate the inner critic within my body. So I will ask myself something like, where does my critic live? Does it feel like a weight in my chest, tension in my neck? Where exactly is it? And then I ask myself, what does my critic say? How do I feel about it? And if you want, during this first exploration, you can give this inner critic a name. Something like what I've heard already was something like the enforcer, the perfectionist, the drill sergeant, or something like that. It could be anything that pops up in your mind. If you don't have an idea, that's also fine. Then just call it the inner critic. If you do this, and especially when you ask questions like what does the critic say, or what does it want me to know, there might be words that pop up like thoughts, depends on how your mind works. There might be images that pop up like memories of the past. It might start ranting like it always does, because now you give it, of course, a stage and you give it your attention. So there might be some critical comments that you can hear. Now that you separated yourself, though, it is easier to just hear it as some kind of mind chatter, and it's not your real voice. So you just will try to get to know this part, this inner critic, in this process. So just be open for whatever you see, for whatever you hear. And by doing this, you will create a distance from that critic. And now you are ready to have a conversation with that critic. And I know this sounds super strange. And I felt really, really strange when I did it the first time. It is extremely awkward because you will talk to something within you. It's a feeling or a thought, and you will have to imagine that there's another personality within you. The inner critic is another personality within you. For some people, this is easy to do and to play along. For some people, it might be harder. So just trust me on this, because it is super effective and it will help you to learn a lot about yourself. So the next thing you will do is to just tell it that you just want to talk. You just want to get to know it. And from my experience, these parts, inner critics, they're usually quite fond of you when you finally want to listen to them, like actively, and not just have them being in charge. So if it's the first time, they still might be a little bit skeptical. So you can also tell the part to just relax a little, because it doesn't have to work right now. It is just time for a little conversation between you and the critic. By the way, if you enjoy that video, I would appreciate it so much if you boop the like button, or if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel or share it with a friend who might want to watch this video. It would be amazing. It would support me and this work. And yeah, let's continue with the next step. Step number 2. Do you remember a time where you talked to a person and this person was so obnoxious, talks about a lot of things, and you know these things are not even true, and you just want to shut that person down. You just want to argue. You just want to tell this person how wrong he or she is. It might be some anti-vax conspiracy person, or someone who believes that Bill Gates wants to plant chips into our brain or something like that. And when we meet a person like that, naturally we want to put that person down. But usually it is better if we stay open-minded and try to understand this person's motive. It's very similar with our inner critic. So once you have separated yourself from this critic, your first impulse might be to say something like, "Get out of my head, be freaking quiet." But that will not help you. Instead, be radically open-minded, no matter what this voice has to show you or to tell you. Again, I usually have my eyes closed when I'm doing this, and then I'm asking myself a few questions that you could also try. Ask that critic, what are you trying to protect me from? What's your worst fear if you stopped criticizing me? And a very good question as well is, when did you first take on this role? So again, when you sit down and you ask these questions and you really try to listen without thinking an answer, really just being quiet and waiting for the answer coming from within you, you might be surprised what you will hear. Because most of the time this critic isn't trying to hurt you. Like, at least that's not what it wants, even though it feels like it. It's trying to keep you safe from failure, from rejection or humiliation. Right? This is a very important learning, that this voice is not something that we should hate. It is something that actually wants to protect us. It is telling us to not try so hard, to not be like this, to not try something new, because it doesn't want us to take risks, because risks are dangerous. And of course, it will be our role to tell this part later that we will have to take risks at some point. So we still need to take charge, but we shouldn't condemn this voice for doing what it does, because it has good reasons to do so. And this conversation can go in many different directions. The critic might want to make you feel things. It might want to show you images, memories, or it just wants to rant about something that happened last week. And like in a real conversation, go with the flow. You might learn something that you didn't know about, and you actually have new questions popping up in your mind that you want to ask that inner critic. So ask that. Get familiar with it. That is actually the most important step. You can do this again and again, just getting to know this part of you. Just get familiar with it, because this critic has never been in touch with you like that before. So it might say something like, "Hey, it's about time. Thank you for reaching out," after it's done ranting with regular stuff. Step number 3 is reminded who you are. Here's something that you should know about this critic. As a part within us, it is often frozen in time, and it makes a lot assumptions about you. It usually thinks that you are also very young, and that you are helpless, and that you need to be taken care of. And it often even thinks that it is you and not just a part of you. So even if we separate ourselves conceptually from this inner critic, in every conversation we have with it, it really doesn't hurt to mention that we are the true self speaking to the inner critic, that we are actually older, that we don't need to be taken care of, that we are an adult, that we are, 20, 30, 40 years old. So reveal all these things to the inner critic. Tell it your age, tell it your your motivations, tell it, what you would like it to know, because it won't know. You might think, okay, it should know, it's inside of you, but that's actually one of the things that you should realize, is that it has many assumptions. It's frozen in time. It's usually very young itself. It had to take on a role many years ago when something bad happened, or when it needed to protect you, when it needed to take your place and take charge and be strong for you, or be something else that you couldn't be at that moment. And the thing is, it was very helpful back then, but now, as you know, it becomes a problem. It is laying heavily on us. So we don't need this inner critic to be working overtime anymore, right? We can tell it to relax now, that we can take charge of our lives, that we are able to parent ourselves and to even parent this inner voice. So before I tell you about the next step, I want you to know that you can stop right there. Step number 1, step 1, 2, 3 are already very powerful and very useful. And this is something you can already do like a few times, just to get to know your inner critic, just to get used to this weird method of talking to something inside of you. And to get to know that part. Again, this part might be very critical, or, well, of course it's critical, it's the inner critic, but it might be skeptical, and because it's not used to you being so interested in the inner critic. And you might be skeptical as well, because you haven't done this kind of work before. So there's a little bit of resistance from both sides, right? So take your time and do step 1, step 2, step 3. If you feel that you're still curious, then you can continue with step number 4. So by now, you should know why the inner critic does what it does. And over time, or even within this one session, you will build trust with the critic, and you can even ask to change its behavior, or if it's going very well, to even give him or her or it a new role. So if it's, for example, used to say something like, "You're an idiot for messing that up," like this very harsh tone, you can help it to reframe its message. And you could say something like, "Could you help me improve without being so harsh?" Or, "Instead of tearing me down, can you help me spot areas to improve without the shame?" Or, "Can you maybe step back a little when I'm trying something new, and we can evaluate everything later?" So again, to get to this point, you need to have established some trust, and there might still be some resistance. So you might make a request, it might not work out, right? So don't expect everything to work out perfectly. It is an ongoing process with yourself and with your inner critic. But you can gently ask for some little things to change, like not being so harsh, right? Just take a step back sometimes, and just watch what happens. And if there's resistance, it's fine, and it's great if you are aware of the resistance. That means you're getting more and more conscious about what's going on inside of you. So anything that happens is good, actually, because everything is basically you becoming more sensitive to your inner dynamics. So step number 5. If this combo goes well, you might be able to end the dialogue by setting an agreement for the future. Obviously, you will not have them sign a contract, because, they don't have hands. And, writing it like 2 signatures with your hand might be a little bit too weird. But you might be able to find an agreement. They can say many nice things like, "Hey, I will stop doing that," and sure, and you might believe that this will happen. So it's important to solidify whatever we discuss in this dialogue. So ask the critic if it's willing to pause before stepping in next time. Don't just make the request like in step number 4. Also ask if it's really willing to do that, and wait for a response. Maybe you can even agree on a signal, like a breath that you take, a mental check-in, a code work that triggers a change in the response, right? Like maybe he's about to flare up, and then you were like, "Wait, calm down. We agreed on that." And and it will be like, oh, okay, all right, I will take a step back, right? Alternatively, you can just remind it of its new role or of behaviors that you have agreed upon, gently, if it would ever start to flare up again. And I will give you a few more tips so you will be most successful when you do this work. The most important thing is that you show respect toward the inner critic. Again, this might feel very weird, but if you see this inner critic as a person, as a personality within you, you will naturally become more respectful towards it. Because if you lack respect, if you are demanding, if you try to control it, if you are mean, if you are angry, right, then it might backlash, because it's a dynamic within you. We are trying to have a nice conversation, to find collaboration, and out in the outer world you will not be able to collaborate to get some stuff done together if you are just a mean. And so remember that this inner critic exists for a reason. It has a job to do. At least it thinks it has an important job to do, right? So instead of fighting it, trying to silence it, acknowledge the presence of the critic and be respectful. Always make sure it knows your real age and that you are the true self in charge, and that the voice is just a part of you and not the whole. Again, this is so important. Remember, this part is usually frozen in time. It has many assumptions and it tends to forget about it. I mentioned this before, but it's something you should do every time you start the dialogue. And the next thing that is very important is ask what it's protecting you from. We did this before in the framework, but it's important to stress here as well, because no matter where this conversation goes, because at some point you might leave the framework in these simple steps, you might start to experiment, you might start to do your own thing. So it is important to keep in mind a few important things, and that is, you should always know the motivation of this inner critic. And when you realize that this critic is only there to keep you safe from something, you don't need to argue anymore. I mean, you will be grateful, hopefully. And by keeping that in mind, you can ask something like, what are you afraid would happen if you weren't there? Right? So again, we try to figure out what the motivation is. So the more we know what's going on, the more we can then enter the conversation and say, hey, what you are afraid of is actually not what will happen. I am able to take charge, right? Like, all the things you are afraid of are not real. It's you don't have to worry about this so much. And then the inner voice can say, oh, okay, cool, well, perfect. Well, then I would just lean back and do nothing. This inner critic might have like huge bags under its eyes after 25, 30, 40 years of working day and night. I think if you are able to make it clear that it doesn't have to work overtime, it might be like, oh, cool, it's about time I retire a little. And the next thing is, you should be patient. And this work will take time. So create a habit to just sit with yourself and to talk to yourself, or other emotions that come up, not just the inner critic. And if that voice tries to resist, then just acknowledge that. Don't judge it, and just try to get to know this part. Take time. You don't have to go to step 4 or 5 and get something done. If there's resistance, just tell yourself, well, okay, that's just what I'm doing today. I will just get to know that part. Like, why are you resisting? What are you afraid of? What do you think would happen? What do you think would happen? And so just be patient. After a while, it will gain trust, and you can go to further steps. You can establish new behaviors, even new roles. I've heard of some inner critics that become not a critic, but your biggest cheerleader inside, or they become an advisor, like an elder. So this is possible, and I know that I've been reading a lot of reports about this and doing my own work, and it works. It actually works, as crazy as it sounds. And by the way, I lean heavily on the concepts of it's called the internal family system, IFS, and it's based on the assumption that we have several parts within us that have their own agendas and that we can talk to. It's exactly what we did in this video, and I found it super helpful to think of it this way. And if you want to learn more about this, there's an excellent book called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. And I love that because he assumes there's nothing bad within us. There's no bad parts as we would think. Like the inner critic is not bad. It's just something that had to learn a certain behavior, a certain role in order to protect us when we were young. But nothing is set in stone. If we are starting a conversation within these parts within us, we are able to loosen them up, to unburden them. And this will also unleash a lot of energy, right? Imagine they don't have to do this heavy lifting anymore. They will be free to take on other roles, like a supporter, like a guide, like an advisor, like a cheerleader. And this will unleash a lot of energy within us. So we will even get not just happier, more confidence. We will gain clarity. We will also gain more energy. We will be more motivated to tackle anything in life. So really try that out. If you have any questions, let me know, and see you in the next one.